You showed up prepared. You picked the icebreaker question that we wanted you to pick because nobody ever picks it. I'm so excited for this interview. So great first impression. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, so speaking of that icebreaker question, this is the one we get so excited about. We want to ask you, what is the wildest thing that's happened to you as a solopreneur?
Yeah. So my first thing online was about relationships. It still is. That's still what I'm known for. And that went online in 1999. So I didn't have a lot of competition back then. So somewhere in the early 2000s, I had the experience of talking to two, and I'm not going to name them, big rock stars who were on the road, who were having marital problems as they were traveling. And I've talked to three big actors, won't name them either, who were on set having marital problems just because I was like the guy that was out there that they found. And so that was my brush with fame of trying to help, five pretty famous people to try to save their marriage. I never would have imagined having those conversations.
And you didn't tell us who they were offline either. So
Yeah, no, I can't divulge that, but they were touring in the early 2000s and they were making movies in the early 2000s. So that narrows it down to just a few, right?
Just a few.
Was that your 15 minutes of fame or were there other times?
So my other brush with fame was when I was 11 or 12, Elizabeth Taylor, the actual Elizabeth Taylor, had to watch after me at a political event.
Wow.
After you. Fascinating.
Yeah, she sat beside me. It was at an inauguration in Virginia. And she was told to watch after me by the people who placed me there. And so she had to watch after me through the inauguration.
I hope you were good.
I was pretty well behaved as a kid, so I suspect I didn't give her any problem. But just to imagine, it was a state patrolman turning to her and saying, "Please watch them during this."
This is definitely after the show further conversation.
So he didn't know who she was, obviously.
I had no idea.
He didn't recognize her. I mean,
no, it's just like this woman who had to watch me.
Quick dumb story. I think I've mentioned it before, but in 1984, I was in London and met some guys from Georgia and we went out to a club, but it was a punk club, and we were all like, not punk. I don't know what they were thinking, but we get in there, and I see this one guy that looks kind of more like me. I was more the 70s, longer hair kind of thing. So I'm chatting with him, and he walks away after a little while, just saying, just saying, "Hi, what do you think of this? This is strange." And this guy says, what did you talk about? And I was like, "What? Who?" He goes, "Jagger." He goes, "You were talking to Jagger." I had no idea.
Well,
those are the best encounters because you're just yourself during those times, right?
Yep. Then when I went over to say, "Hey, I didn't know it was you," the big bodyguard got in the way and said, "Yeah. Cool it." So funny. But
Joe, suffice to say you had the right mindset to talk to Mick Jagger.
Boom.
I couldn't think of another way to tie this conversation back into where.
Let's get it back on.
So that's going to be my bridge.
I like it.
We'll follow you right across the bridge.
Perfect. We made it. We are back to interview mode. Listeners, we're talking mindset today. Lee, you've had so much experience working with a variety of different people, and you have said that mindset isn't woo, because I think sometimes people think, well, that's not an important part of the business. That's the woo-woo part of the business. But it's actually a strategy. So for a solopreneur juggling sales, client work, everything else, what does treating mindset as a strategy look like in practical terms?
I think one of the things that often gets in our way is we think we're making permanent choices at every step. And one of the things that I realized long ago is I do much better thinking about things as experiments. Let's try this out. Now, that does mean trying it out, like giving it a fair shot. But when I talk to entrepreneurs, sometimes they get so locked into what they're doing and how they're going to do it that they feel like they've signed up forever. And so one of two things happen. They follow it as it continues down, or they never get started because they're afraid to commit. And so that mindset piece of going, we can always change is one piece. I just believe in a lifetime of growth and of treating things like experiments. And that changes how we go about our daily life, whether it's entrepreneurship or just taking care of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you think about those experiments, I mean, some people, especially solopreneurs, put so much pressure on themselves. They're like, what if this experiment doesn't go right? What if this? What if that? So much pressure as a one person
Yeah.
business owner. So, what would you say the most common mindset patterns are that you see that quietly sabotage these people who just put so much pressure on themselves?
Yeah, and one of the things that is so let's pull another piece in of it has to be effort or it's not okay. I've talked to entrepreneurs that are like, I don't feel like I should charge people for this. This is just what I do, and I'm like, that's the like the best job. Like you love doing things, so when you make it hard, when it's like, I should be trying harder than I am to do this, that is another of those mindset pieces. So we put those two together. It's, they confuse themselves on what they're doing. I have a core belief about every business that they are solving a problem. And I've had this conversation so many times with people like, I don't solve a problem. I like making pizzas. I'm like, you're solving a problem for the person who wants a good pizza, right? And so there, it's always, yeah, finding that customer, right, who has the problem is the whole thing. And so, yeah, you can do what is your skill. In fact, I hope that people do. They're doing something that is in their zone of genius, to use Gay Hendricks' term. So you find that thing that feeds you and you love to do, then that's what you do. And at the same time, to understand that that is solving a problem for somebody. If it doesn't solve the problem, it's not going to go very far. So, we stack these up. There are experiments you can try to figure out how to best deliver that, recognizing that getting started is a big piece, and then deciding when to pivot away from that experiment is a big piece, not judging it by this should be harder than it is. It's still going to be effort, right? I mean, that is just the nature of life. But when it feels like I should be pushing harder or making it harder, that's where I challenge people, and then to ask the question, so what am I solving? What problem is it that I am addressing? Many entrepreneurs seem to be unaware of the problem they're solving while they're solving it. And so they end up missing the possibilities that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, people can always be working smarter. I mean, it sounds like with the entrepreneurs, solopreneurs that you've spoken with, you can see things that they can't see and ways to make them more efficient. And you talk about evidence based habits to help them work smarter. So, what are a few small habits that you think can dramatically change how a one person business owner approaches their day to be more efficient and maybe even see things that you're saying that they aren't?
One of the habits I have for myself is making sure I have space to breathe and think. And I watch many people who want to be so hard at work that from the minute they're up to the minute they're down, they are pushing, and that doesn't allow for creativity, which is where you get in your own way. So a big habit I think needs to be there is finding some space to breathe in some way. I walk my dog in the morning and I just let things filter through. And that's when I have ideas for different pieces. In the shower is another place that I'm known to have these experiments. And my wife is used to seeing me with a towel on running over to jot something down, but it's because there's a breathing space there. I mean, that's where genius starts to have a room. When we get so stuck in the tasks and not allowing it to breathe, we close off our own creativity. And every entrepreneur has to be in touch with that creativity to grow the business.
Absolutely. But so let's say because solopreneurs are running every aspect, we're like, Lee, I hear ya, but if I'm taking my dog for a walk, I want to have my AirPods in so I can listen to this expert talk about this. So I'm learning while I'm walking and I just don't have time for that breath. It stresses me out to even take that moment. How can they actually rewire their response to stress instead of continuing to just push through all of it and take that moment to breathe?
Yeah, and that is so there are a couple of pieces that are tied into that. One is that many times people tie their self-worth to the amount of energy they put into it. And so it's, to step back and I had a conversation just last week with a person who's like, I don't have time. I'm going into the office super early. And so we started talking. I'm like, how might that change? And he finally admitted that some of what he was doing was to fill the time that he was afraid to not fill, right there. And so there is the reality check of how much am I cramming in to be busy instead of doing the business, but to do the busy stuff. So that's a reality check. There is obviously lots of stuff to do. I would argue that if you're taking a walk and you're listening and you're having that internal conversation, you are doing some of what we just talked about. Very few people listen to things and only listen to the words. They hear the words and they start playing with it in their minds. So I'm listening to a podcast and I go, oh gosh, that point would be an interesting podcast for me to think about, or an interesting chapter in a book or an article. That is creativity. It's our way of relating to material coming our way. So if they're able to take the dog, listen to the AirPods and take in whatever, a book or a podcast or whatever, they are doing some of that breathing. I that's not excluded from that. But are there ways to block out a time, to find even a half hour to just sit with an idea, and to recognize that that actually is part of the business. If you want to grow it, that is part of it. If you get stuck in your lane, you're not going to be doing the experiments. You're not going to be creative. You're probably not going to be able to grow much.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to kind of dig into that, because it's so true that listening to some smart person talk about some topic can inspire a lot of ideas and things, but really, if you don't have that quiet time, the real quiet time where it's just you and your thoughts, which I know scares the crap out of people these days, it's hard to really get creative in your own way about your business. I find that those times. So when I walk the dog, I take them out for hikes, and I don't have anything in my ears. Plus, there's bears, so it's always good not to be distracted. It really helps to just have that kind of quiet, just nature or whatever it is that's around you. And I find that some of my best ideas come from that.
That's where the ideas have a chance. Otherwise, you're so engrossed in something. So when I am actively writing a book, I get up an hour earlier than normal, and I just go straight down and start writing, because that's the valuable time before I check my email, before I do anything else.
You get coffee first, right?
Well, the coffee's brewing as I start.
Okay,
so
good.
I
good,
start
good.
the brewing and get busy, and then so one of my rules is that it is an hour when I'm doing that writing. And if I'm in the middle of a sentence at the end of that hour, great. I would rather be at the middle of a sentence than at the end of a page, because then I come back to something that starts it again. So yes, and in the middle of a sentence, I'll go get myself a cup of coffee and come back, and it's still going. At that hour, I've gotten that moment. And it doesn't have to be an hour, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes for somebody to be just thinking through, not writing a book. They can just be thinking through what are the processes, and that allows for that breathing room. There's no other way of allowing our brains to really kick into that creative place other than giving it space.
So let me ask you this question. So we're talking about these solopreneurs. They're like, we have a million things to do. We can't take the time. But on the other side of the coin, we have the solopreneurs that are like, what are you guys talking about? All I have is time. I'm by myself all day, every day. My mind can wander about my business all day, every day. Like, I have too much of this time, I think, and it's a detriment. So what do you say to those solopreneurs to make them more mentally resilient as they're running a business all by themselves?
Finding a community of some sort, because so you're right, that is the balance point. First, we need those relationships just to be healthy in life. Of all the studies that show those who do well longevity-wise and happiness-wise, it's because of their connections, their relationships. So having that community first provides that. Second, that is a creative place to bounce ideas off of. One of the dangers for people when they're doing that thinking is they spiral it down. They have this great idea, and then they start getting into their self-doubt and their rationalizations and everything else until the end of it, they're like, it's worthless. And so they spend all this time spiraling rather than having somebody who they can bounce some ideas off of. And that means that that person is supportive of them and vice versa. So they have at least a person, if not multiple people, to bounce those ideas off of. Most people find that those relationships end up being valuable to how the business grows, but also valuable just in the whole creativity and health of the person.
So I have this next thing kind of pivots away from this, but you kind of triggered a thought when you were talking about the book and writing and everything. And Joe and I talk to a lot of people that try to figure out what to call themselves. They're like, oh, I'm a consultant, I'm a this, I'm a that. And a lot of times, and you've mentioned this, people say, I'm just a consultant, I'm just a writer. That's what triggered that
Yeah.
thought when
Yeah.
you're writing, I'm just this. And like they already, by saying I'm just, they already take themselves down a notch. So how can people reframe it, go confidently, and say, instead of saying I'm just a consultant, saying like being proud of it and really grow that mindset to help them grow their business?
It's an interesting story. Way back at the beginning of my career, I did chaplain work, and I started as a quote student chaplain, and then I ended up supervising the student chaplains. And one of the first things I remember as a quote student chaplain was I was not going to tell people I was a student chaplain. I was going to step in and say, "Hi, I'm the chaplain." And my belief was when people did that, they were doing it because they wanted to let themselves off the hook. They didn't want to stand into what they were there to do. And so gave them the out. Oh, I'm just a student. And so one of the things I often said to students as they were starting is, you're a chaplain. That is what you're here to do. Step into that. And it's the same kind of thing where suddenly people, because they are downplaying what they do, they go to their heels. It's what I see with people when they are selling something. You know, they sell, and then person says, how much is it? And I go, oh, well, and they start justifying the price. All of a sudden, they're on their heels again. And it's the same stance, which means that they're not standing for what they are doing. They're backing away from it. And so leaning into it at that point, leaning into being a writer. And I would push people, people are like, yeah, I'll write, but I'm not an author. And I'm like, what is the definition of an author? But somebody who's writing a book. So if you're writing a book, you're an author. Step into that. And they're like, oh, I don't have a book finished yet. You're writing a book, so that makes you an author. If you're consulting, you're a consultant. If you're coaching people, you're a coach. Step into that. And so a piece of that is just deciding to step into it, not holding back.
Well, and so for these writers that you've been talking about, you talk about like there's a framework hidden inside a book somewhere. And for service-based solopreneurs, many of them haven't written books, but how can they uncover that framework still hidden inside their expertise that they may not be aware of?
Yeah, and it's funny how many people say I don't have a framework. In fact, I was talking with somebody the other day who was I was on her podcast, and she said, I don't believe in these frameworks or anything else. And on behind her, there was a poster of the different steps in her thing. And I said, right behind you is your process. That's your framework. And she turned red, and I said, that's the thing. We all have that, right? We all have a way we do things. If I were to say, how do you make your coffee? You would probably, give me the normal and say, here's my little twist on it. That's a framework of how to make coffee. And so when I'm talking with authors, many times that framework has disappeared for them. They're too close to it. I'll read a book and I'm like, this is your framework. And they've never thought of that. So sometimes it is being too close, but with anyone, I can ask them to simply say, give me the 2 to 8 steps that you do to do anything. Whatever that is your framework. Now you can pretty it up, give it an acronym or something like I often do to help people remember it, but you've got your framework. You're just asking a question, how do I do X, whatever it is you do? I had a salesman. I was a car salesman, and we were having this discussion. He's like, I don't have a framework. I'm like, how do you approach a customer? What do you do? How do you start it? And he goes, oh, and he lodged into this. He had this multi-step process of connecting with them. I'm like, that is your framework. That's how you do it. And it's probably unique to you, because we all put our little twist on things. That's our creative piece. That's the framework.
I would think that somebody that didn't have a framework would be not very good to work with. That sounds problematic, right?
And at the beginning of anybody's career, their framework is probably what they've been taught by whoever got them there, right? That's where it starts. And then you start kind of moving into your own uniqueness of it. And that's when you know that you have some mastery behind you. There's still a framework even at the beginning. It just may be the one that you've adopted until you adapt that one to you.
How can they take this framework and then actually build a sustainable business with it? Like without all the hype, the funnels and all that, but actually do something that works for them.
Yeah. So I keep using stories because I think they point to this piece. But I was talking with a person who had written a book, and I'm like, "So what are you going to do?" He said, "Well, I guess I'm going to do public speaking." I went, "You don't say that with a lot of enthusiasm." And he said, "Well, I have a friend who published a book, and he does public speaking. He's like, that's what you do." And so that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm like, "Okay, what have you done?" And he showed me the printed stuff, brochures and flyers and all this stuff, and he had started to contact people. And I said, I don't feel that that is something you're really wanting." He said, "I don't like to public speak. I can do it, but I don't like doing it. I don't like to travel. I can do it, but it's an inconvenient thing for me and my family." I'm like, "Why are you doing it?" "Because this person told me to." And so one of the things that I want to make sure someone does is build a business that fits them. Right? It's got to
This is
be,
all we ever talk about.
if it doesn't fit you, it's going to box you into a corner, and you're never going to hit that zone of genius. You're always going to be fighting against your own business and sabotaging it quietly. And so I asked him simply, what would it look like for you to actually do what would fit your life? And it was somewhere between consulting and coaching. So there are only a few types of forms that come out of most books. You're providing a service, you're consulting, you're coaching or therapy or public speaking, something like that. They're just a few.
Well, some people become, influencers and personalities from their books. I mean, there are people that write a book and then become big on, YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. So that's,
And
I mean, it's not usual, but it does
that's right.
happen.
And that is a lot of people, and this was one of my early experiences of why I went, okay, I think I'm going to talk more with authors. I was sitting with the person who said he'd written his book, and we were at a publisher's event with other people. And I said, "I love your book." I'd read it. The publisher had actually handed me a copy when I first got there. I was helping put on the event, and he handed me the copy, and I went through. I'm like, "I love your book. What are you going to do with it?" And he looked at me and said, "What do you mean? I did it. The book is it." And I'm like, "So what's next?" He said, "Book sales." And I said, "Okay, but is there anything else?" And he was committed to that. Yes, there are people who find their fame through writing a book and end up with YouTube fame and whatever else. It's a pretty thin point, to the point that I wouldn't count on it.
Right. No, I think there are people that are built for it, but yeah, the vast majority of us are not going to go there. Just like we don't make it if we try to be rock stars or famous actors.
There's a reason. I mean, it is a certain personality, but you still have control over what you do from it. And so later on in that same event, we were at dinner, and he came back to me. He said, "I'm wondering what you meant by that." And I just said, "I think there is a message in your book that is strong." And so I want to ask you a question. At the end of that book, a reader has gotten there and went, this is really important. What happens next?" Because that's the business that could be there of like, what is the next thing that could happen for that reader? And here's the thing. I said, here's the thing I find is you've got a message that could serve people, and it ends. So there's a possibility that something could serve that reader. There's a possibility that that something would serve you too as a business. And there is a miss. The message is there. There's a miss when there's no extension of that. So that was my question.
I love these examples you're giving because you've just spent decades studying how people thrive, basically. So, in your experience, what do you think separates solopreneurs who truly thrive from those who feel like they're constantly surviving, living paycheck to paycheck? etc.?
So you talked about that mentality piece. There is a construct of some people are. It doesn't matter how much money. There's another person, not an author, but a business person I was working with, and he said, "I don't know how I'm going to survive. I've only got $3 million in the bank. That's it. And then what am I going to do?" And I'm like, three for me. If I had 3 million, I'd be going, I've got 3 million in the bank. I'm see y'all. And for him, that was a mentality of lack, right? And so it didn't matter how much was there. He was going to live with it. Within that was going to be the pain point. And so if he'd come in, he could have said, "I've only got 10 million." That's a mentality piece, right? He's got a way of blocking that. There are plenty of people who are thriving on far less because their whole thing is, let's see what I can create. Let's see how we can work with this. And what is my meaning and purpose? And that is probably the bigger thing that I've seen is that solopreneurs who find their purpose in what they're doing thrive better than those who are desperate for, whatever, the next 3 million. So back to stories. I had a realtor who's like, "I just sell houses. There's no purpose. I just sell houses." And I'm like, "Have you ever considered the fact that what you do, your purpose is helping people find a home, not a house, but a home?" And for the other piece is helping people realize that they're leaving their home to somebody else to have as a home. That is a big piece. That is not insignificant to people's lives. He contacted me a few months later and went, "Every time I'm doing this now, I'm thinking, is this the home for them? Is there a way I can find a better home?" That's a meaning piece, not just I'm going to sell this and make a buck.
Well, speaking of stories and finding your purpose, if you're okay, of like getting a little personal with you here, but you had a health scare. And ever since then, you've called that time bonus time. So, how has that perspective kind of shaped the way you build your business and your approach to work today?
Yeah, so I, long before that, had been studying how people thrive, which is the irony. And I wasn't particularly thriving. I wasn't taking care of myself. I had built a business, but I was stressed out all the time. I wasn't sleeping well. I didn't eat well. I didn't handle stress very well at all. So my body woke me up. And that was a big wake up call. I mean, the doctors, I remember the moment they called my wife. And, when a doctor is using his first name, I can tell you're in trouble. You don't want them introducing themselves by the first name, nor giving their personal phone number to call back. And they said, this will lead to disability and eventually it'll kill him. And so they were right about the diagnosis, wrong about the prognosis. And I don't get into the details of what it was because it's unfair to people who have it and it's going to go a different way. But I had an acute version of this issue. And so I was miserable. The specialist said, "I'm sorry. The good news is you're going to get better. The bad news is I can't make you feel better." So I felt bad for, it was about 8 months. And we were 4 months into thinking this was just headed bad. That's a pretty substantial wake up call. And I was in my mid 30s with two young kids. So that was when I went, okay, I've got to do a better job of actually taking care of myself, and B, make sure that I'm attending to what's important in life, not just what's the daily task, but what is the meaning behind that? And so that helped me to strongly position that I'm here to make a difference. My real task is to leave the world better than I found it.
Uh, leave. Well, thank you for doing that. And I think you've done that successfully for decades now, which is a great pivot because we ask all of our guests this question. You help so many others find success. What is your favorite quote about success?
Ray Kroc said that you are either green and growing or red and ripening. And that's the difference between, are you taking on the growth or do you see yourself as stuck and stagnant? So green and growing or ripe and rotting.
I love it. Great, great quote. Well, Lee, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you if they want to learn more?
So authors who want to figure out what is in their book can come. We've got a couple of resources there at book2businessblueprint.com, because that's what we're trying to build is how do you go from that book to your business? What's the blueprint? So book2businessblueprint.com. I actually have a map there for people to kind of start thinking through what does that look like. have a podcast there that's just a few episodes in about how that happened for me, and how I stumbled through it and how I might do it better, differently if I had thought through it. So for authors, for sure, that's booktobusinessblueprint.com.
Great. Well, like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I did too.
And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, leave that 5-star review. You guys, we've gotten a handful of 5-star reviews just in the past week, and we so appreciate it. So keep that momentum going. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, including YouTube, and share this episode with a friend. And we'll see you next time on the Aspiring Solopreneur.